When we looked for solutions to try to help make being compliant and collecting taxes and remitting taxes easier, TaxStar popped out at us. Autofile for us is awesome. Without Autofile, we would have multiple people having to manually process, and with Autofile, we have scaled to doing taxes in 40+ states. I'd recommend TaxStar because it's really worked for us.
Hi, we're back now with Matthew Grattan, who is the VP of Sales and Accounts at TaxStar. Matthew is a sales leader in e-commerce and sales tax, and with over 10 years of experience, he's driven by passion for solving problems for online businesses. He takes pride in leading a team that provides the best customer experience possible every step of the way. As the VP of Sales at TaxStar, Matt helps the team meet customer needs through transparency and accuracy. So without further ado, here's Matt.
Thank you, Albert. Appreciate that. So today what we want to cover, we're going to cover 3 unexpected ways that sales tax impacts your experience as an online merchant. There's, when you think about sales tax, it's kind of one of those necessary evils, right, in terms of the shopping experience, but ultimate requirement there. And there's some interesting impacts that it has in terms of making sure that your buyers are having the right experience, through the checkout process and so on and so forth. So we're going to cover some areas of impact there. As Albert said, I'm the VP of Sales at TaxStar. I've been 8 years in sales tax. It'll actually be 9 years as of next week. So I would have never thought I'd have a 9-year career in the sales tax space. I've been in e-commerce for over 10 years, and I live on Bainbridge Island, Washington, which is just a short ferry ride outside of Seattle. So what we're going to cover here today is really the sales tax 101 for e-commerce. We hear from customers all the time. They don't really understand sales tax. They don't really want to understand sales tax. So, we work with them to educate them. But we're also going to talk about those 3 unexpected ways there's impact. And these areas of impact impact your conversion, your customer experience. So that really important that we'll dive into the details there around speed, reliability, and accuracy. And then we'll also touch on how automation saves time and money. I mean, in today's world with multi-state requirements, technology really is the answer for merchants out there. First, a little bit about TaxStar. We are on a mission to make e-commerce easier for everyone. So we work with merchants of all sizes, big and small, and the goal is really to provide them a solution that gets sales tax off their plate. We are a crazy bunch. We're technology driven, but we are focused on, again, using technology to provide a better customer experience. And a little disclaimer here before I jump in. Okay, let's dive in here. So a little bit about sales tax. Let's just go through kind of where things are at. So first, sales tax is a pass-through activity for your business. You're basically doing the government's work. It's usually going to be a smaller portion of the overall sale, and you're going to need to remit the sales tax that you collect. You're going to have to remit it to the states that you collect it for. So you're actually acting as a collection agent. And what we find is there were days where merchants used to say, I'll pay out of pocket, I'll take care of that. But really that's not the answer, especially in a multi-state requirement. And also it's not necessarily the most compliant thing to do. So ultimately, it should be paid by customers. They should recognize on a line that they're paying it, and it should be accurate. But it is the requirement that you have as an online merchant. And Wayfair versus South Dakota really changed the landscape of sales tax. Prior to this decision, requirements were based on physical nexus, right? So where you had offices, employees, inventory, those were triggers. Wayfair changed it by bringing in a new component. So Wayfair in South Dakota, it was a case where Wayfair said, "Hey, we're not going to pay sales tax." South Dakota said, "Well, you should because you're selling a lot in our state." It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of South Dakota. And what that allowed South Dakota to do was bind Wayfair to collect based on how much they sell in their state. So it could be tied to either orders, revenue. It could have different time periods, whether it's a previous calendar year, current calendar year, trailing 12 months. And all the other states have jumped on board because it was a trigger outside of the physical component to really target e-commerce merchants. And so when you look at it in terms of both what you sell and where you sell, you need to comply with sales tax. And sometimes products are not taxable in certain states, right? So clothing and apparel may have some exemptions in a specific state, or there may be specific rules like in New York City under $110, clothing material might be exempt in that area, right? It's exempt in New York City. But there are states that have different rules associated with different products and services. So the other component of that is where you have nexus. So that ultimately is the trigger. We talked about the physical, now with the economic piece as well in play. So you really now are, if you're a growth merchant, and it's amazing to me how many companies are impacted. And you may be doing a couple million a year, you may be doing more than that, but as you grow, the impact can go from 5, 10, 15, 20 states, and it's something that you need to be aware of and you need to make sure you're tracking as well, your exposure. And here are some of the common risks, for compliance issues. That one could potentially make you to pay out of pocket. And one of the things that we hear all the time is, and the economic nexus tracking, the thresholds that the states have that I talked about. There's a lot of companies out there that aren't aware of it. They're not complying with it, and all of that because this rule, the Wayfair decision, was roughly 2 years ago and a couple months. So I think it was June of 2018, July of 2018. So all of that time, that's potential risk. It's a risk period if you haven't stepped forward and started collecting where you have a requirement. So, and the other piece, again, as you're growing, you need to be making sure that you're tracking all of your exposure based on that growth. We also talk to a lot of customers that say, well, I sell on Amazon, as well as Magento, and I don't need to report my marketplace sales. Amazon does that for me. That is true, but the marketplace sales both have a requirement for some states in terms of impacting your economic nexus exposure. So it wouldn't just be your Magento orders, it could be also your marketplace orders. And then also there's a reporting requirement as well associated with that, where you may have to report your Amazon orders as deductions on your form because they're exempt, but you still have to report them along with your taxable sales. Charging the wrong rate and not collecting enough sales tax or overcharging, that has impact as well. And then when you think about what we're coming into the holiday season now, traffic is going to increase, online traffic. And the stability of the API is so critical in terms of if you're using a cloud solution and you've linked Magento to an extension to a cloud tax solution, that API is critical, that performance. If you don't comply, there is always the potential for audits. So it may or may not happen, but there's the potential for it. And I think that's the key, is that you just want it taken care of and done right so you don't have any anxiety about it. That's just so important. And then the overall customer experience, if you overcharge a customer, they're probably going to call you. Well, actually, they probably won't call you, but there will be a few that may, and that's just a customer service issue. If you undercharge, they almost definitely won't call you, I bet. And then the experience. So I'm in a cart, and everything is not, it's a slow, if it's a slow API, that has impact in terms of conversion. So there's all these associated risks. A little plug here about our blog. If you'd like to go there, there's a lot of great information there. So let's get into speed. Walmart did a study, 1,000 milliseconds, every 1,000 milliseconds impacts conversion, in a positive way, a 2% conversion increase. So every reduction in page load time drives conversion. And it's, it is amazing, whether you're on a mobile device, your laptop or whatever, speed is important. It matters, and it drives conversion. Does a slower tax solution slow your customers down? So speed of your site is really important. And what is interesting is, that checkout experience is really important. So a couple things to that is, if you're on Magento, having like an address validation option prior to freight selection is a really cool thing. To normalize the address, selecting the freight shipping method, and then you're going into checkout. When you get to checkout, that is that magic moment, right? The tax calculation occurs, right? And they're going to click purchase. So that tax calculation is right before, a buyer is going to click that purchase. So that's really important that it's seamless, fast. And, we've run a lot of tests and optimizations of our systems. 20 milliseconds or less is industry best. And that's a metric that if your tax provider is delivering that kind of speed, they're not impacting your conversion. They're actually benefiting it. So again, the speed is just super important. Let's get into reliability. So with uptime, it's a measure of reliability, right? And so if the system is down, the tax solution you're using, the provider's API is down, you're not going to be charging. Now, you could build in a fallback mechanism in Magento to local rates, and that always is an option as well. A little bit of extra work for you to maintain those, but the fallback mechanism is an option. But the reliability of the system is just critical. And if you allow an order to go through with tax, and without tax charge, that's something that you're going to have to pay out of pocket. Also, if you default to like a local rate or a flat rate, it's not going to be as accurate. So super important in terms of the customer experience there as far as the uptime is concerned. And when you look at the graph to the right, if your provider has an SLA, it should be at least 4 nines. If it is over an annual period, it's a fraction of a day. If it's less than that, like 99.95, it's going to be 1.83, almost 2 full days throughout the year. So again, I think that's something when you look at whoever you work with, one, you want to make sure that there is an SLA in place. And if there is downtime, that impacts your experience, you want to make sure that, there's potential penalties associated with your provider or some type of remuneration for you. The other piece is, tracking the status page of your provider. It should be accessible. It should be always, capturing all the historical information. And when you get into Black Friday, Cyber Monday, these are big days. Like for example, we processed over 2.3 billion in GMV last year on those 2 days. So really important as we think about a tax jar, we're thinking about our system right now. We're scaling well beyond what we did last year, right? So we're thinking system scalability to support multiples of that, because we have to be prepared for our customers, especially on those days. Accuracy matters as well. And so charging the wrong rate. If you undercharge, you pay it out of pocket potentially. If you overcharge, it can be a bad customer experience. So the challenge you have with that is there's thousands of jurisdictions in the U.S., and I'll go to the next slide here. They don't necessarily align with zip codes. So that is important that you have a solution that doesn't necessarily use a zip code based system. It's using a system that is using technology to interpret the street address to GIS coordinates and being able to put a pin on the rooftop so you get the correct state, county, city, and any special taxing jurisdictions correctly. On one rooftop address, you can have upwards of 5, 6 different taxing authorities. And the reason for that is all these jurisdictions, they want a piece of the pie as well as the state. So again, the accuracy thing can be challenging in certain states. Also, product taxability. So, the states are usually behind new offerings, and we see it all the time with new ideas that people are coming out with. Specifically, dating years ago, even just something like software as a service. Back in 2010, it was just kind of starting out, and there was only a handful of states that taxed it, that saw the growth that was going to happen, and they got in front of it. And now there's over 20 states that tax it, the rules for products and how they're taxed changes all the time. So it's something that on a monthly basis, quarterly in some states. So you really want a solution that maintains all that for you, right? Cloud-based, all the product rule data is up to date, all the rates data, because the rates also change, right? They'll fluctuate rates, the states, to do some balancing. Maybe they're low on the budget, they got to increase something a little bit, and they have the data to know what an increase will impact based on buyer activity in that specific area of the country or a particular area of that state. So again, really, really important that you have a solution that's always up to date and being maintained. And now I wanted to touch on multi-channel, because this really, this is very common for a lot of the growth merchants that we work with. They are selling on marketplaces. They take some sales potentially in their ERP system. They're selling on Magento, doing a lot of business there. And they may have a store location. So the whole concept of selling on multiple channels, and when you think about it, is how do I get all that data right together and consolidated into a report that's compliant based on each state's format, because each state has different reporting requirements. And so, and some of these platforms may not have an integration to a specific provider you're working with. They may just use their own local option. And so there can be some variance there in terms of what they use, versus maybe what you're using on Magento. So I think the key thing though is the accounting gymnastics. You got to get rid of those. You got to get to the point where you've got a solution as best you can, streamline and automate the feed of all of the completed order data, completed transactional data from your orders, your returns, partial returns, your canceled orders or voids. You want to be able to get all of that in a timely fashion, right, into one system that's driving all the reporting, and then also providing all of the associated filing requirements. Because one thing when we talk to customers with sales tax, the clock is always ticking, and it's always ticking, because you've got every month or quarter, you've got to file, and there's a timeline you got to do it by. If you don't, there's penalties. So you've got that clock ticking in the back of your head, and you're thinking about, gosh, I got to get all this data together. I got to get this, over to the state. I got to make sure they're paid and so on. So that's a challenge for a multi-channel merchant. And then on the marketplace side, again, it can drive potential economic nexus based on your sales. And then one other thing you got to realize, you have Nexus in a state, you are required to collect or report on all your orders, from all different channels, exempt orders, taxable orders, and so on. So that's a common thing that we hear from customers, that they say, well, I'm only going to report these orders from this channel. So no, you have to report from all channels. Once you say Nexus, you're raising your hand saying, I'm going to collect for the business I do in your state. So let's cover automation. It really is the answer today. And some of these things we talked about. So really the impact of growth on tax compliance, growing, more channels, more sales. And when you think about it, all of these things, these 4 components here really matter. Speed, right? I've got to have it fast. Reliability, right? The system has to be reliable. It's got to deliver the uptime that I need. Accuracy, right? Making sure that the calculation is accurate across all channels, the reporting's consolidated, and also a system that provides me transparency. So as I sell more, if I trigger economic nexus in the state of Washington, I want a notification that says, hey, heads up, you're at a certain percent of the threshold, or you've crossed it. So ideally, you want to get it before you've crossed it, so you can plan for it. But you want some type of a risk barometer or transparency gauge that keeps you aware of what you need, and then support. And I will tell you this, again, the clock's ticking on sales tax. You've got your business to run. When you have a question about sales tax, you need support. You need quick, effective answers. You don't want to spend a lot of time on sales tax, right? When people do, they're just not happy, all right? It's not, they want to be focused on their business. So when you do have a question or you need help, that timely support is so critical. And any support that you get from a, from a vendor needs to be driven by some type of an SLA, right? Hold them accountable. This is what TaxJar does. Right? Accuracy, automated calculations. We've got a pre-built-in extension to Magento. We built it in-house with our own people. So we've got Magento experts on our team. That's so critical, from back to the support thing, to get timely, effective support. We know the platform. And so we're always rolling out new releases, very active with our M2 extension. And then providing out-of-the-box state reporting in the format that's required for each state. We do that automatically. It accrues on a daily basis to you at all times, exportable, and so on. And then our auto file service. And this really is, I've heard it referred to as just, the sweet nectar. I mean, auto file is something that just takes the filing off our customer's plate. We do it, we become their outsourced agent, we file the form, and we take liability. So if we don't file on time in the right format, TaxJar takes liability. We pay the P&I, penalties and interest. So that's critical. And then, tracking that economic exposure and offering insights, transparency. Where do I have to collect? Where do I sit with each state? Just important to be able to track that. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present here to you, and hopefully we'll have some questions here that I can help with.
Thanks, Michael. That was a pretty interesting presentation. We have a couple questions from the audience. I'll go with the bigger question first. Even if Amazon is acting as a marketplace facilitator for states in which I have a nexus, i.e. inventory stored there, will I still need sales tax permits for these states so I could file state sales tax returns?
Yeah, if you are using Amazon and you're using fulfillment by Amazon, there is the potential that you've triggered inventory nexus in certain states. I think they have distribution centers roughly through 26 states roughly. So there is that potential that you ship product to one location and they've moved it around to multiple locations. So there is potentially an inventory or physical trigger. And then if you've triggered economic nexus, again, then that's a requirement for you to collect and remit. And if you are working with Amazon in a lot of the states, they, in over 40 plus now, they handle the sales tax for you, but there still is that requirement, like I talked about earlier, to report on those orders in many states, as deductions or exemptions on your form. And even the state of Washington has a specific, marketplace facilitator field for that exemption.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that, if you're selling also on Amazon, you're going to run into problems with Amazon's commingled inventory. If they take your inventory and just mix it with everything else and spread it all across the states, then all of a sudden you may or may not have nexuses everywhere, and it's pretty much a gray zone.
Correct. Yeah, one of the cool things that we do is when we pull in the Amazon data with our integration to Amazon, we actually will flag where they've shipped product for you, and we'll give you a flag that says, hey, you've had product shipped from the state. So, but you can also get that data from Amazon as well.
Sounds like an easy way to really rack up your tax bill without knowing.
Exactly.
So second question, and this one's a little bit vague. Maybe if you are this user, because it's coming anonymous, and we don't answer your question, just repost it a little bit more clearly. The question is, how do I know the speed of my sales tax solution?
Yeah, great question. So one would obviously be you do work in a test environment and test against their production or production servers of your provider, or if the dev environment mimics prod, you can work there. The other component I would say is they should have a status page, like I mentioned earlier, and on that status page, it should not only show uptime, but it should also show calculation speed. Because that's so important, and it's really to be transparent to your customers. You should expose that to them so they can get a gauge for what your speed is, and then if there's any issues or components to that, it's all tracked. So everyone has the data; they just have to be willing to share it.
Okay, sounds good. I see no more questions. Hold on, let me just give it a quick refresh to make sure I'm not missing anything. So pending, no questions, and there is nothing in chat. And we've got a couple minutes. So thank you so much, Matthew, for the presentation. At this stage, I think we're going to go into a half-an-hour break. So feel free to come back in half an hour, and we'll have the last set of sessions for the solutions track. Thank you again, Matthew.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep.